I'm 84 years old. I've succeeded in living a long life, but successful. But I'm failing in retirement because I continue to work as a mediator, arbitrator, as a peacemaker, doing things I love to do. I believe I add value to the dispute resolution process, a process that is designed to halt and eventually end contentious legal battles. But I'm not here today to talk about my ideas, knowledge, and experience for the time I was Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. No, I'm here to talk about a man who would be 215 years old, 216 if we waited 4 more days, February 12th. And what we can learn from Abraham Lincoln about decency and leadership is something that we desperately need in 2025. This is characters and qualities that exemplify true leadership: learning from history, persevering through failures, and also embracing unity. This is what we need today. These principles are as relevant now as they were then. Abraham Lincoln is not only, in my view, our greatest president, but one of the greatest leaders in history. And imagine yourself in the middle of a nation torn apart by the tumultuous times of Abraham Lincoln. How would you lead a nation toward unity? This is the challenge we face today. Just think, when Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office in March 1861, 7 states had seceded. As Commander-in-Chief, he not only had to oversee the operations of his armies and navy, but he was forced to confront and decide unprecedented and critical questions of constitutional interpretation that came with civil war, staying awake many nights wondering what he could do under our Constitution to face the crisis. The questions related to, and remember that this is only a partial list, the president's war powers, the first military draft in American history, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, governance of occupied districts of the South, military tribunals for those accused of treason, the status of slaves freed by Northern armies or through their own efforts, the partition of the state of Virginia and the resulting creation of the new state of West Virginia, compensation to slaveholders, and the relationship between state and federal governments. Most importantly, the president decided in the middle of war to change the war's aims from reunion to reunion and freedom. Leadership is the focus of many TEDx talks, and for good reasons. Leadership is important for success in business, politics, sports, and our personal and professional lives. Leadership is something many aspire to achieve, sometimes for the wrong reason, but few attain. And that's unfortunate because we need more leaders today, men and women. There's certainly no oversupply of them, and in fact today there appears to be a critical shortage. And leadership is something that gives us hope and confidence. When we have truly great leaders, we have trust. As humans, we need trust for our survival. It's what keeps the outside forces outside and keeps us safe. This has been true since the beginning of human history, and it's still true today. True leadership never goes out of style. It should always be welcomed, but at times it isn't. As I will show you in the next several minutes, Lincoln's leadership and what it can teach us today is as relevant now as it was during his life. The well-known TEDx speaker, Simon Sinek, often talks about leadership in inspiring and intelligent ways. One thing he often says is that leaders don't focus on being in charge, but on those who are in their charge. That is true. Simon knows it, and so did Lincoln. A few men and women are born to lead. Alexander the Great, Joan of Arc, but they are rare. But others, like Lincoln, become great leaders and are molded to be great leaders because of their crucible experience that they have lived. By listening, by having character, and by knowing not only what the right things are to do, but by knowing what the right things are. First, we learn from Lincoln that a great leader doesn't necessarily have an impressive upbringing or background. He was poor, self-educated, and held many different jobs, ones that would not only be considered blue-collar by today's standards, but menial. But Lincoln did not lack in direction and confidence. He knew right from wrong from the outset, and he wasn't afraid to recognize the truth and to proclaim that truth to others. Let us begin by discussing Lincoln's courage. I agree with Winston Churchill that courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it is the quality that guarantees all others. Unless Lincoln had possessed the courage to demand legislative action to end slavery and to oversee the efforts of the legislature to make that successful, it is virtually certain that slavery would have endured past the conclusion of the Civil War. Lincoln's courage had specific elements that we should all try to emulate, even if our lives have much, much smaller scopes of influence than his. First, Lincoln had a confidence in his own judgment and an unyielding adherence to his own beliefs. But this is not enough. One must also have an obsession with one's character. If we were to examine Lincoln's presidency today, something we obviously cannot do, we would see again and again that Lincoln constantly questioned whether he was fulfilling his obligations to all Americans, white or black, and what his answers to those questions said about him as both a president and a man. Lincoln knew that there was no such thing as defeat if you refused to give up, whether in politics or in life. I see Lincoln as a man of tremendous personal and political courage. I also see him as someone who possessed the resiliency to see through to the end what he set out to do. Political losses were used as learning tools, wisdom accumulators, and ways to make sure that the same mistakes were not made twice. There's a saying sometimes attributed to George Santayana and sometimes attributed to Winston Churchill: those who refuse to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Whether it was Santayana or Churchill, the lesson is the same. We must learn from our past so we won't be condemned to repeat our mistakes. Lincoln learned from a hard life of experiences, political and otherwise. He knew that while our country had great people, resources, and almost unlimited potential, it was not learning from the consequences of slavery and its evils. And if the country refused to learn, it was not only doomed to repeat its mistakes, but it was on the road to perdition and destruction. He once gave a speech in 1838, long before his presidency, and this is what he said: "At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? I answer, it cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher." Then, in his famous House Divided speech, Lincoln called out slavery as that great divider, and against the advice of his advisors, he chose to make this now famous speech. Why? Because he knew the country needed to hear it, or it would soon be the author and finisher of its own destruction. Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fail, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will either become all one thing or all the other." 750,000 died in our Civil War. The House ultimately did not fail, and thank God the evil of slavery ended for all. Today we don't have slavery, but we still have oppression. We still have inequality. We still have prejudice. And we still have a lack of respect for the dignity of all men and women. Reflect on a time when you faced adversity. How did you navigate it? Lincoln's resilience in the face of setbacks teaches us the power of determination. I remember moments in my career when I faced moral and legal dilemmas similar to ones Lincoln confronted. His unwavering commitment to integrity inspires my own choices, guiding me through those challenging periods when I made decisions or arbitration awards, and I tried to be fair to all people, whether as a mediator, arbitrator, or on the bench. Politically and socially, we are a house divided once again on these and other core principles that have heretofore made us the greatest nation on earth. From Lincoln's early struggles to his presidency, his life was a series of lessons in resilience. He knew that they are often animated by others with more than venal self-interest than any larger consideration. He wasn't afraid, and he wasn't too proud or idealistic to engage in the wheeling and dealing needed to secure support. In a word, Lincoln knew that results mattered. He wasn't afraid when it was necessary to push the envelope. Despite opposition, Lincoln was steadfast in his fight against slavery because of the contributions of African American soldiers and sailors to the Union cause. Over 200,000 African American soldiers and sailors enlisted, and their fervent devotion helped swing the war toward Northern victory. "If they stake their lives for us," Lincoln wrote a friend, "they must be prompted by the strongest motive, even the promise of freedom, and the promise being made must be kept." Ending slavery, of course, was the right thing to do. We all know that today, and we thank Lincoln for his leadership on that nation-saving effort. But today, we are often polarized on important issues, just as our nation was once polarized on slavery. Issues today include immigration, drug use, voting rights, abortion, gun control, LGBTQ, our criminal justice system, economic inequality, social welfare, the deterioration of family life, and the loss of community. If we have great leaders out there, and I believe such men and women do exist, they will step forward as Lincoln once did, and once again perhaps argue against the advice of their modern-day advisors to proclaim, "This house cannot be divided. This house will not fail. Stand with me to support this house. Stand with me in finding our common strengths. Stand with me on our common principles, our common purposes. Stand with me on our common ground. We are and must always be one nation, never a house divided." How did Abraham Lincoln respond to our modern issues, and how would he unify the nation? In addition to the characteristics of Lincoln that I have highlighted, he would be patient, hopeful, and empathetic. He would call for sacrifice, affability, selflessness, and getting up every morning to work on bringing our country together. The answer today, though, is not another civil war. That would be a profound failure to learn from our history. We would be repeating our tragic mistakes. We cannot allow that to happen. What Lincoln would say were he here, and what I'm saying to you all now, is that what we need is not a civil war, but a civil peace. The key word is civil, as in civility, civil discourse, civil attitudes, civil respect, and even civil disagreement when necessary. Let our house be strong, built to last another 10,000 years, for our children and their children, and for all children forever. This is the message of Lincoln. This is the lesson from Lincoln. And this is my hope and prayer for you and for our country. In the words of Lincoln, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Let us heed these words, standing together for unity and progress. As we navigate today's challenges, may his legacy guide us toward a united future. Thank you very much.